Be Well. Be Well is a book written by Dr. Jessica Clemons, and it's a fantastic book. If you're interested in mental health or mental health awareness, I cannot recommend this book enough. This book goes through a few different aspects of mental health. It starts with a general introduction talking about Dr. Clemons' life, how she grew up in a not so mental health friendly house, where seeking treatment is stigmatized. But through hard work and perseverance, she was managed to go to college and get an education to later become a psychiatric doctor. This intro sets the groundwork for the rest of the book. The first real section of this book goes through the 6 pillars of stigma. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but it summarizes why people are afraid to seek mental health treatment, such as what they've seen in media, as mental health hospitals and such are seen as a scary thing with a tyrannical overlord, or social pressures. Hey, we are part of this community. We don't seek mental health help. We are stronger than that. To personal peer pressure, what if I don't have it? What if I'm just overreacting? These are all tackled in the 6 pillars of stigma. Following the 6 pillars, she goes into anxiety, as it's one of the most common mental health disorders there is, and how it affects people differently. And even mentions something I didn't know. OCD is a form of anxiety, as they often have to do something over and over again, else all day they're worried about it. You have to turn off the oven exactly 7 times, and if you don't do that, all day you're thinking, did I turn it off? Is it going to be okay? Will it be okay? And then anxiety sets in. The chapter after anxiety tackles depression, as depression is less common but still very prevalent in today's society. And often it's mistreated. A lot of people see being sad as being depressed. Well, depression itself is more of a long, numbing feeling. You lose interest in things you used to love. She goes in depth about depression and how there's not always a trigger, and most often people with a depression disorder don't have a trigger when they fall into those depressions. After she tackles these 2 main topics, she goes into still common but often misrepresented mental illnesses, such as ADHD. With ADHD, she goes on about how people often stigmatize it as a childhood disorder, where those with it will grow out of it as they age. She also talks about PTSD, as that's often seen as a soldier disorder. You only get that by going to war, when that's not true. Okay, quick editor's note. This next section, I went into substance abuse. I decided to edit this part out of the video as I accidentally said things I don't recommend, such as I was confusing addiction with substance abuse, when the key takeaway from the section was, while helping to support someone to get help, use the term they're comfortable with. If they say they have a drinking problem, call it a drinking problem. If they say they're an addict, then you can call them an addict. But the key is to use what they want you to use, while supporting them to get proper treatment for their condition. As oftentimes people who have a substance abuse problem have that problem because they're trying to self-medicate another underlying issue. And to help support them to find better treatment for that underlying issue, you shouldn't stigmatize them by calling them something they personally see as a negative. You want to bring the humanity out of them. You want to show them the good in themselves. You don't want to degrade them and call them an addict or an alcoholic. You want to call them what they want to be called. After going through the more common but misrepresented disorders, she goes through the less common and less well talked about disorders, such as bipolar and schizophrenia. These are often horribly misrepresented and seen as dangerous. Well, they can be dangerous. She goes on to explain how the danger is more to the person with it than to others. Bipolar has high highs and low lows. The highs are known as manias, and the lows are almost as if they're full-on depression. And she goes into the struggle with that switch. As for schizophrenia, she goes into how it's less likely someone with it will have a delusion and try to stab you, and more as if they hear someone constantly telling them they should harm themselves. Or from interviews I've personally seen with people with schizophrenia and people I've talked with schizophrenia, it's often not just hearing voices, it's sometimes seeing people that aren't actually there. And that disorder is rough, but it's not going to be them going after you. It's most likely they're going to end up hurting themselves with that disorder if anyone's going to get harmed. And she goes into that and how it actually affects people. The next chapter after all that are talking about postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. So postpartum depression commonly occurs shortly after birth, and essentially it's rough for mothers. Giving birth and raising a child can cause a depression. Postpartum depression typically is a lot more short term. Well, postpartum psychosis is similar to postpartum depression. However, instead of feeling this overwhelming numbness, it's anxiety. You're scared of letting others handle their child. You're worried. It's more episodic and more short term than full-on anxiety and the full-on anxiety disorder. But much like postpartum depression, and actual anxiety, it should all still be treated with great care. The next major section talks about treatment options. And again, I can't go too in-depth, but she goes on about how it's best to try to seek a provider if possible. If you can't afford it, see if there's a residency or somewhere where they're teaching about this and where they can help provide support for less cost, as the students helping you overseen by a qualified psychiatrist. So you're still getting great treatment, but for less cost. If traveling to a provider is not an option, look into telehealth and other more long-distance ways to get help. There are ways to get help. I can't cover them all in this short review, but she covers quite a few in the book. Finally, she talks about self-care. In self-care, forming healthy habits, getting into exercise, noticing your milestones. Making your bed in the morning might not seem that big, but if you're depressed, celebrate that. That is big. Milestones aren't the same for everyone, so celebrate that. Reaffirm things will be okay. Don't go into negative positivity where you essentially bully yourself to be happy, but instead recognize this will pass. This will be okay. I'm allowed to experience what I'm feeling, and it will pass. And lastly, take care of yourself. This doesn't mean indulging in bad habits. Remember to also focus on yourself. Sometimes, and especially I know I get caught up in this, you get too focused on others and helping them where you neglect actually helping yourself. And she really emphasizes this point of help others, but help yourself first, as having a strong foundation is the key to having a good life. And that's essentially Be Well. It's a fantastic book. I do wish it went more in depth on certain things, such as ADHD, but it is a great overview of mental health. And if you need a broad understanding of how mental health is treated and what different disorders mean, I cannot recommend this book enough. That was Be Well by Dr. Jessica Clemons, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.